This is a special presentation of Farm Journal Television.
Today's farmers have high-tech equipment, from tractors to GPS to the hybrids, fighting for every bushel. Here to help is agronomist Ken Ferry.
There's definitely some things that we put into our systems pyramid.
And agronomist Missy Bauer.
So we're trying to create that true V trench.
And they're using the systems approach to higher yields on every acre. I'm Clinton Griffiths, and she's Margie Fisher. Together, we're Corn College TV.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Winfield, uncovering insights through data to help farmers be greater. Visit your local retailer or learn more at winfield.com. And by Micro Essentials, the next generation of fertilizer designed to meet the needs of advanced farming technology. For more information, visit microessentials.com.
Missy, today we're going to take a really close look at the planter and at planting. And let's start with the systems approach to planter setup. And there's kind of a process that you like to follow.
When we think about setting the planter up, it's something we need to do, in the shop ahead of time or outside on a nice day, but before we ever get to the field. There's so many things on this planter that if we make sure our setup, everything from starting at that hitch pin all the way to the closing wheels, that we can do to really have a huge impact on what we see out in the field.
Okay, well, give us some examples and kind of how you work your way through one.
Well, what we'll do with the planter is like I said, we'll almost start up like at the hitch pin, and there's things that we look at there as far as the planter being level. When we get back to the row units themselves, some of the things that we look for are the whole transmission system. Moving back from there, then we really get into the row unit itself. Are you dealing with things like a no-till coulter or not? And if so, how do we adjust that properly, make sure it's at the right settings?
Why is it important to do that preparation ahead of time?
What we find is there's such a huge correlation to planter setup and having everything set right into what we end up with out in the field as far as ear count. So it all still comes back to ear count. Ear count's going to be what's driving our yields. So when we go out to our fields and we see that we've got a good ear count where we're maybe only losing 1,000 ears per acre, we know we're in good shape. But if we go out there and we're losing 3,000 to 4,000 ears an acre with things because our planter wasn't set up properly, then we really start to lose a lot of dollars. So remember, 1,000 ears per acre is worth 5 to 7 bushels.
You have a checklist that you like to go through?
Yeah, that's something, that we really like to follow. Just some sort of a little checklist that reminds us of everything, from parallel arms to drive chains to the row cleaners and the coulters and everything like that to make sure the settings are set right. And every planter is a little different as far as brand, your little tweaks here and there. And that's why it's kind of nice to have a little checklist and a sheet that you can kind of follow along and give it your overall inspection. So we want this planter performing at its best when we get ready to head to the field for that first day. Yeah. There's also things we'll do in the field, but what we're focusing on today is, ahead of time. What can I do in the shop or outside if it's nice before I ever get to the field? What we want to look at on the planter now is the parallel arms and the bolts and bushings here. So these parallel arms on both sides, we're dealing with 4 sets of bolts and bushings in there. What we're concerned about is if things start to get loose in here, if these bolts start to get worn out or the bushings start to get worn out, that as this planter's going through the field, we'll get a lot more of the row unit bounce happening. So one thing that we can do ahead of time to try to check that is what we call the rock test, where we'll actually grab a hold of the back of the row unit and shake up and down on it. And just watch inside here whether or not we're seeing movement that would indicate that something is loose or that we'd want to pay attention to if we got a worn out bushing or a worn out bolt. So you can see this unit as you rocked it definitely had some movement in there. What next step would be to do is actually pull those out and inspect them. If we see the bolts themselves have got where the threads are getting worn down, then that's an indication that we need to replace and put new bolts as well as bushings in there. So as you can see, if we've got something that's really wore out here, this bushing's just going to have a lot of play in it and it won't get tightened up for us. So this is something that as the season goes on, things will start to get loosened up, that if we even just keep the bolt itself tightened up, it really helps the wear on this quite a bit. So we always recommend that if you're planting, get partway through the season, maybe you get rained out, to go ahead and put a set of wrenches On all of these, remember there's 8 on every single row unit here, and just try to snug things up. If we keep them tighter, then we won't start to get this loose or slopness to happen in there that'll start to cause this row unit to bounce up and down more.
Still ahead, Missy Bauer checks the planter settings before heading to the field. But up next, Ken Ferry walks us through calibration in the shop.
Over the generations, fertilizer, the unsung hero of the farm, has been in the background, quietly nourishing crops with very little fanfare. Until now. Meet the next generation of fertilizer. Micro Essentials.
There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
Things that we like to have done, before we go to the field. For instance, you can use a drive motor like this to calibrate your insecticide. So if you're making an insecticide application, you can use dummy product, put it in the tank or in the boxes, and then you can run it out and make sure that each box is calibrated the way it should be. I really like it to be able to give myself a good bearing chain check. So we can run the motor, and we can watch all of our drive chains throughout the planter to make sure they're running smooth. There's no links sticking or catching or jumping up on it. That lets you know the kind of condition the chains themselves are in. Beyond the chains, of course, it allows me to check the bearings down here, and we can look for wobble, or you can do the old mechanic check where you can put the screwdriver up against it and listen for a grind or a pop by putting your ear to the screwdriver. But we can check all of our bearings to see what kind of condition the bearings are on. In the larger planters, we can check all the power unions, or where the lovejoys come together to run the next wing, to make sure that there's a smooth transition of torque from one drive shaft to the other, so we don't have a misalignment. So it helps us pick up on the misalignment issues ahead of time itself. With our corn meters themselves, we can turn the meter, especially in the finger meters, to make sure that everything's turning smooth within the meter, and we don't have anything binding up within the meter itself. So if the meter's not sitting right, or our drive shaft in the meter isn't lined up, as we turn it, you'll pick up a wobble or a wiggle in the box itself. At the end of the season, you clean that planter up, getting ready, put away, you can put it back on there and do the same check over again, and kind of get you a preliminary of if you think you've lost a bearing through the season, or something is starting to wear for you, so you can check it. But it just gives you a lot of confidence, that you can do this, and you don't have to wait to get out in the field and do it.
What we want to set up here is the disc openers. So on the disc openers on a planter like this, their purpose is to go through and create that true V trench. So we're trying to create that true V trench in order to give a spot for us to drop the seed down in the bottom of that trench. So there's a lot of things that are important about these disc openers for trying to get things set right to have good performance out in the field. So the one thing is going to be the diameter of the blades themselves. So that will depend on the model of the planter you have. A lot of the planters, when the blades are brand new, are 15 inches in diameter. So for example, on this John Deere or on a Kinze, they're 15 inches in diameter when they're new. And if they get worn down to 14.5 inches, then we want to be replacing them. You can see this disc here has been worn down to 14 inches. So this one had been worn way too long. When they get worn down this much, then we'll have trouble creating what we call the point of contact and really getting that true V out there. Now other planters, like a Case IH planter for example, those blades are 14 inches when they're new. So when they get down a ½ inch worn down to that 13.5, then it's replacement time. So you always want to check your owner's manual to know which blades you have and what their original diameter is versus where the wear point is. But what we want these blades to do is create that true V. In order to do that, these blades are coming together and have what we call that point of contact. To check the point of contact, in other words, the point that these two blades come together, we use business cards. So we take a business card, we slide one in from the bottom, we take another card, and we slide it in from the top. And where these two cards don't slide together anymore, that's what we call the point of contact. And then we'll go ahead and we'll take a measurement of that point of contact to see where it's at. So in this case, I'm at about 1 1/4 inches. And I want to do this about 4 times going around here. This particular planter actually should be set closer to 2 to 2 1/4. So in this example here, we're pretty shy on our contact. We don't have enough contact of these blades coming together to create that good true V. The bigger problem that we see in this example here is when we spin, and we did this around here 4 different times, which is what I would recommend. We went from 1 1/4 inches to 1.5 inches, and now we have a spot that was only about 1/4 inch where they're touching. We had another spot here where the blades weren't even contacting at all, where my business card would slide all the way through it. When we see that much variability in the point of contact, that usually tells us that there's also something warped or maybe bent in here. So in this case, we'd probably look at putting a new blade, 2 new blades on that aren't bent or warped after this one's already went through part of a season. I do want to also take a look at getting a row set right, so we'll go ahead to one of the other rows and take a look at how to make sure they're set properly. So when we're trying to adjust these disc openers to get it set right, again on this planter it would be between 2 and 2 1/4 inches for that point of contact. What we're actually changing in here is the shims. So we have shims that are on the inside, or you can move them to the outside. So we go ahead and move shims in or out based on if we need more or less point of contact, and then tighten things back down. So this one we've taken some shims out of the inside to help pull it in, get it tighter in there, which will create more contact compared to what we had on the other end. Now this particular one is not bent or warped or anything, so the point of contact is very uniform around here when we checked it in our 4 places. But again, we're just sliding our card in from the top to where it quits moving, slide the other one in from the bottom, and then we're taking that measurement there, and in this case we're at right about 2 1/4 inches for the point of contact. What we want to look at here is making sure our gauge wheels are set properly. We talk about them being set properly, we're talking about having good contact between the inside of the gauge wheel here and the actual disc opener itself. So the way that we want to check that is actually lift these wheels up like they're in the up and running position like they'd be in the field, and then pull out on them and see if we've got any space in between here and the disc opener. In this example we do have a little bit of space, and then I'll also try to wiggle it back and forth, and you can see that we've got a gap in there. And what our issues with this is as we're planting and we've got this space in between here, we'll get dry soil off the surface that comes into here, and then as this wheel turns it actually falls back out into the seed trench itself. So we end up with dry soil in the seed trench even though maybe we had good moisture down there at 2 inches deep where we were trying to plant. So what we'd like to do is get this tightened up a little bit more. I have an example over on this side where we do have it set right. So as I raise this up into that up and running position and try to pull out on it, you can see that we have no space in here at all. And when I try to wiggle it back and forth, it's tight, so we're not having that gap or space moving in and out of there. And when I let go of this, it's almost to the point that when I let go, I can actually hear it slide down this disc opener itself. I don't want them so tight that when I let go that they stay stuck up. Okay, that would be too tight. But what we see here is this is a gauge wheel that's set right because we have nice snug up against this disc opener, not allowing soil to get in between the disc opener and the gauge wheel. Another thing that's really important on the planter, in our planter setup as we're going through our checklist, is going to be looking at our seed tubes, the seed tube guards, and then if we're running any sort of a seed firmer here on the back. So what do we want to look for on these seed tubes is just making sure that we're not getting any edges that are starting to get thin or worn out. We don't want to get it to this extreme here where we can actually see it's was bad enough that it wore all the way through and we're missing part of the seed tube here. If you keep an eye on the thickness of the diameter that we have here, and as you see them start to get a little bit thin, then we know we want to make sure that we're replacing not only the seed tubes, but then also at that time these seed tube guards. So this guard actually adds a lot of protection to this seed tube itself. So these guards in this example, when they're brand new, are 1 inch in diameter. So if we see these getting down to about 3/4 of an inch, we'd want to make sure we're replacing them. You can see here's one that's extremely wore out. You can see how narrow it was. So we want to make sure we're always changing our guards often, and if you ever have to change your seed tubes, you should be also changing your guards, because that tells us our guard was worn enough that allowed us to get into the seed tube itself. One of the other things we want to keep an eye on back here, if you are running some seed firmers, this example, some Keaton seed firmers, is we want to feel a few things on them. One is, what's the bottom like? This bottom here is becoming very rounded. As they start to wear, it'll get more rounded instead of a flat bottom. The idea behind the seed firmers is when this bottom is flat, when our seed drops down into the seed trench, it'll actually take and just firm that seed down into the bottom there. We get more uniform planting depth, and we get more uniform emergence because we're taking water up more uniformly because of the good seed to soil contact. So I like to feel these, and if I feel them getting rounded like that, we go ahead and replace them as well. We also want to pay attention to the tension. If they don't have much tension on them, we can turn the screw in and put more tension on them so they have a little bit more pressure as they're going through the soil. So that's a few things to keep an eye: your seed tube, your guards, and if you're running some sort of a firmer on the back, are things that we need to keep an eye on in the shop before we head out to the field.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Supercharge your phosphorus this fall with Avail to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring.
Supercharge your P with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Studies show that when you add Avail to your fall-applied phosphorus, you can see an average increase of 9.9 bushels of corn per acre. Avail reduces phosphorus fixation to promote more efficient P uptake to the crop for stronger roots, better overall plant health, and higher yield. Supercharge your P this fall with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring. Ask your fertilizer dealer for details today.
Over the generations, fertilizer, the unsung hero of the farm, has been in the background, quietly nourishing crops with very little fanfare. Until now. Meet the next generation of fertilizer. Micro Essentials.
Picking the right attachments, of course, is so depending on crop rotation, soil conditions, the practices on the farm itself. And we start with the coulter. Got to kind of think what the coulter does. And in my opinion, the coulter is used for two purposes. One is to cut residue and leave it in place in a no-till situation so I can get down into the soil with my disc opener. I want the residue to stay in place. So this would be in my blow sands, my coarse soils, where I'm worried about moving the residue away. The soil may dry out too quick, or sand may blow and cut the corn. So I want the residue to stay. I want to cut a slot through that and put my corn or my soybean down below the ground and keep the residue. And in that case, when I'm just trying to cut through the residue, I wouldn't use a wavy coulter such as this, which is designed for tillage. I would use a fluted, slightly fluted or bubble coulter that would go down in the soil and be very sharp. And this one here is not very sharp, so I would run the risk of pinning trash with this one. Instead of cutting it, it would go and pin it down in. Now, on the other hand, if I want to use a coulter to do tillage in tough silt loam soils where I want to do the tillage so my disc opener can follow through, that's what the wavy coulter's for. And I'm going to go out here and I'm going to run that to do some type of tillage in front of me so my disc opener can slide through and pretty easy. I'm going to make sure this coulter stays a 1/4 inch above the seed depth. Once we move into a tilled situation, I'm going to recommend the coulter come off, because this coulter really running in tilled soil is going to push residue down. It's going to push it in the furrow, and we're going to have trash pinning in a situation where we're going to have to move it. Now, if I want to do tillage and no-till and move residue out of the way to warm the soil up, I want to do both of them, then I'm going to use this coulter and I'm going to add a wraparound style row cleaner to it. So I'm going to clean the residue, and then I'm also going to do my tillage out here. And in some soils, that's what you're going to need because how tight they are and how hard they are to do tillage on. and a lot of our lighter soils and our coarser soils, we can do that tillage with a row cleaner in itself. Just let the row cleaner stay in the ground and make sure it does the tillage for us in itself. Once we get to where we're chisel plowing, inline ripping, vertical tillage, anytime we're starting to add the tillage to it and I have a loose environment, the coulter's coming off and I'm going to go into a residue remover format where I'm going to push root balls and residue out of the way. If I'm in a lot of loose soil, I like to add depth band wheels to the row cleaner assembly to get a little more float. So it stays very active with the ground, but it's also sensitive to the ground changes itself. If I'm running row cleaners in conventional tillage, I'm going to have to pin the bottom. I'm going to have to restrict how far down these row cleaners can go. I'm going to hold them up. If I'm in a no-till type environment, I'm just going to let the depth wheels or depth bands on the side do the work itself.
Up next, it's time for Ask the Agronomist. Ken Ferry answers your questions on maintaining kernel count in tough growing conditions.
There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
How do we know if this ear is going to hold all the kernels that it pollinated? In ideal situation, we're going to pollinate the butt to the tip, and we're going to have that happen in 3 days, 5 days on the outside. You can see this, we got nice pollination going up, and then we start getting in trouble here at the end as we really got hot and dry, hard to push out a silk, and we have a white colored tip. And unfortunately, even though we did get a lot of these pollinated, those that are white, while these are yellow, they won't hold. As this gets into heavy milk early dough stage, there's going to be a point where all these kernels get aborted no matter what we do. So that's kind of a tough deal. You come out here and you could lose 5, 6 kernels around off the top of here in just one afternoon when it decides to make that decision. But if you go out there and you see white, gradual white to the top or cream color to the top, you're okay. But if you see a bright yellow color and then it turns white, that's about it. And trying to save kernels beyond that, they're going to abort in a matter of a few days after this gets to mid-dough stage.